It's billed as Australia's premier Aboriginal event, and this year's Garma Festival is underway in the Northern Territory. Talks about Indigenous constitutional change look set to feature prominently as political and community leaders make their way to Arnhem Land. Political reporter Dan Conifer is there and joins us now. Hi Dan, what's been happening?
Well, as things are warming up today, this is the first day of the four-day event. People still arriving from all across the country, business leaders, community leaders, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people from all across Australia making their way here to Arnhem Land for 4 days of talks. And the opening ceremony, that'll be later this afternoon at 4 o'clock local time. We'll bring you that here on the ABC News channel. But before then, there'll be a really interesting discussion between Julian Leeser, who's a Liberal MP, who's been at the forefront in his party of the push for Indigenous constitutional change, and Pat Dodson, who's the spokesman on those issues for the Labor Party. This issue, of course, coming to the fore over the past few weeks with Ken Wyatt, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, raising the prospect of a constitutional vote within 3 years on this issue. Now that proved to be controversial within his own party and was shot down from various quarters within the coalition. So be interesting to hear what Julian has to say. But it's not all about constitutional change. There'll also be talks about closing the gap and trying to improve outcomes in health and education across a whole range of areas. The theme of this year's Garma is Pathways to Our Future. So a focus very much on the next generation, and being here on Yolngu country in Arnhem Land, as always, treaty and sovereignty will set to be discussed as well. So a full platter of discussions ahead of us across the weekend. Joining us here in Arnhem Land for this year's event is the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, who joins us now. Linda, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dan, and I join with you in recognising country and thank the Yolngu for allowing us to be here for this amazing event over the next 4 days.
What do you think will be the key discussions and some of the key takeaways after this year's event?
I think what you've identified, Dan, I think one of the key discussions will be the Uluru Statement, will be about entrenching an Indigenous voice in the Australian Constitution, but also a broader discussion about what Uluru said, and that was a process of national truth-telling as well as Makarrata Commission, which leads to treaties and agreement making.
With the Uluru Statement, where are we at now after the past few weeks that we've had, and elements within the coalition making it very clear that they won't accept an Indigenous voice in the Constitution?
Well, I know that Barnaby Joyce has had a bit of a turnaround on that one. And the Prime Minister has made it very clear that what he's talking about is a legislative voice and a constitution recognition of First Peoples. And that is not what Uluru has said. The Labor Party is clearly saying that we adopt the Uluru Statement and the 3 elements that I've just identified in terms of the Uluru Statement. But we also understand that what's crucial about this is what Patrick and Julian will be talking about this afternoon, and that's the co-design process. At the end of the day, it's what First Nations people say that should give us the direction within the Parliament.
And if the outcome of that co-design process is the same as what we had at Uluru, and the Indigenous community says we must have it in the Constitution, would Labor accept a legislative model, which seems to be the only thing that the coalition is accepting at the moment?
Dan, there's a long way to go in this discussion. I know that people want answers right now, but we've got to wait for the co-design process, and I have said, as has our leader Anthony Albanese said to both the Prime Minister and me to Minister Wyatt, we want to work with you, we want to collaborate, and the only way that we can get referendum change, whatever it is in this country, is if there is a bipartisan approach. But bipartisanship is not a race to the bottom. Bipartisanship has to be achieving excellence. So we will work collaboratively, but we will be also very much informed by what First Nations people say across the country.
But if the coalition said at the end of that process the only thing on the table is a legislated voice, would Labor accept that?
I think we have to just take one step at a time. We have said very clearly that we adopt the Uluru Statement. We have said very clearly the 3 elements of the Uluru Statement. And we've also said that we want to listen to what people say in terms of the co-design. That will be our guiding star, or stars, and it's just way too early to say what the end result's going to be, except that what Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders want is certainty. What they want is a voice to the Parliament that cannot be dismissed by any government the way in which ATSIC did. They want permanency, they want security of that voice, and that's what we have to achieve.
Just on another issue, during the week you made Labor's position on the cashless debit card clearer, saying that if by the end of the year the government doesn't show there's community support where those trials are underway, then those trials should be made voluntary. Can you just give us a sense of what proof you'll need or you'll accept to allow those compulsory trials to continue when that comes to a vote in the Parliament next year?
Dan, the first thing to say is that the current evaluations, particularly the Arima evaluation of East Kimberley and Ceduna, did not paint itself well. It was a terrible evaluation, and it also said that the card was not achieving the reasons that it was put there. So what we've got really is two things. We've got the debit card, which exists in the Northern Territory, and the cashless welfare card, which exists in 4 sites across Australia. What's alarming is that the government wants to get rid of the debit card in the Northern Territory and put everyone onto the cashless welfare card, and Labor will not be supporting that. We do not support any further rollout of this card. We voted against the Goldfields, and we voted against Hervey Bay. And it really comes down to the damage, the unintended maybe, but the damage this card is doing to people, and it is not addressing the issues of drug and alcohol, pornography. In fact, there are some absolute anomalies in which the card can be used. So Labor is saying clearly to the government, we have some thresholds that we want you to meet in terms of this card. But I have to say that if a community demonstrates that it actually wants the card, Labor's not going to stand in the way, but it has to be proper and informed consent.
Linda Burney, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks,
we'll
Dan.
have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Ros, that's Linda Burney, Labor's Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, and plenty of discussions along those lines and across a whole range of topics over the weekend. We'll keep you up to date with it here on the ABC News channel.
Great, thanks Dan.